And then I will go ahead and share my screen.
You guys are stealing some of my thunder there. I saw the second or third slide, but
What?
I won't ruin the surprise.
I will say, Dr. Schubert, we learned a lot about you.
Oh, great.
You learn why you
Chris
click
Irwin.
or how you click because of
Don't click.
yeah.
Yeah, we understand you a lot more after that little conversation that we had. A lot of things made
Always
sense.
blushing.
So anyways, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be doing the speaker introduction for Dr. Chris Irwin, who is senior lecturer for the Nutrition Dietetics Department over at Griffith University. And then presenting today will be myself, Nate, and Peter. So for our outline of what we're going to be discussing today, first we're going to go over some background information about Dr. Chris Irwin, and then we'll jump into some of his hobbies as well as some fun facts that we have discovered about him, and then continue on throughout his education from his bachelor's to his master's to his PhD, and then moving into some of his research and future research, as well as some of his publications, and ending with some of his funding and awards. So some interesting stuff that I kind of figured out when we started doing some research was there's quite a few Dr. Chris Irwins out there. So don't really know who this guy is, but in case you guys go ahead and Google Dr. Chris Irwin, we're not talking about him. So this is some random person. And then interesting enough, there is also a Chris Irwin that was a motor racer. So he raced cars back in the 1960s in Britain. And it's kind of interesting because Dr. Chris Irwin, the one that we are doing our presentation today about, actually has done some research when it comes to driving. So I thought that was quite funny. So we're not talking about him. We don't really know who he is. So if you Google him, you find a random picture, whatever. And we're not talking about, the cool guy from the 1960s that raced cars. However, we are talking about, Dr. Chris Irwin right there in the present. And we'll be seeing him shortly here. And then jumping into some background information about Dr. Chris Irwin. So he currently resides in Gulf Coast, Australia. And to the left of the screen, we have a beautiful picture of Gulf Coast, Australia, which makes me super jealous and because it looks absolutely beautiful over there. And and then he's also at the picture to the right, which is Griffith University, which I believe he has spent most of his career, if not all of his career, over at Griffith University, which again resides in Queensland, Australia. And so some of his hobbies is when we were interviewing him, we got to know him pretty well, and he's a pretty exciting guy, and he's done a lot with his life. And back in the day, he used to be an avid runner, and more recently, he kind of stopped running and turned over to cyclist, if that reminds you of anybody here. And so currently he cycles about 300 kilometers per week, and he really enjoys going out for rides and just for some peace and quiet, some time on his own. And he really enjoys doing charity rides. And then fun to know is that he actually bikes to work every single day. So we made a joke that he has to trade out his bike wheels more often than his car wheels because he doesn't use his car that often. And then another fun hobby of his is he loves to golf. So he loves to go out on the weekends and, shoot 9 to 18 holes here and there and stuff like that. And then lastly is one of his hobbies is he also loves to go snowboarding, which was kind of surprising being Australia and not really thinking that there's very many mountains and or snow in Australia. However, he does travel a lot and actually has gotten a chance to travel quite all over the world in search of mountains in order to snowboard on. And so that's something that he really does enjoy, and he wishes that he could do more. But unfortunately, living in Australia, there's only, I believe, one mountain available to go snowboarding on. And so some fun facts about Dr. Irwin is that he's obsessed. And when I say obsessed with coffee and beer, I mean like literally obsessed. He told us that he drinks roughly 8 cups of coffee a day, which honestly, I don't know how he manages that. I'm sure he's off the walls, but it's probably because he's also riding 300 kilometers per day. And then he also loves beer. And partially that might be because it is a part of the Australian culture. They love their beer. And then he also is currently working on a study about drunk drivers hitting koalas on the road. And so I thought that was rather super interesting. You know, he's all about saving the koalas. And then again, we're going back to one of those driving studies, which kind of ties back to his predecessor. Or say that word, Chris Irwin, the racer from the 1960s. And that'll jump us into education. I'll hand it off to Nate there.
All right, so getting into the meat and potatoes of his education and background, just like most of us, coming out of high school, he didn't know what he wanted to do. And he eventually found out that he kind of wanted to pursue engineering. Quickly into that, only into 1 year into engineering school, he actually dropped out. And coincidentally, he ended up working for another 3.5 years for an engineering firm, which to me didn't make sense, but I guess it was work then. He eventually later found out that he was interested in nutrition. So he went back to school and got his bachelor's in nutrition at Griffith University. And he was looking at how nutrition plays a role in exercise performance. He also stayed another 1.5 years to earn his education certificate. So much like here, you need to earn an education certificate to teach. And then he taught PE for the next 5 years, traveling and teaching in multiple different countries, such as the UK, Canada, and Australia. Moving on to his master's. So I guess staying at the same college is a big thing over there too. But he continued his education after 5 years teaching. After he got done teaching PE, he wanted to continue doing research. So he worked directly under Dr. Desbrow, which he was interested in beer, much like the Australian culture. And his primary focus was nutrition and dietetics. And his thesis was on the effects of caffeine withdrawal on exercise performance and acute caffeine. And primarily kind of wanted to look at towards general population, athletic population, and recovery and performance aspects. Moving on to his PhD, this was kind of saying like staying at the same college was kind of a thing over there. He again stayed at Griffith University for his PhD, and he was looking at hydration and alcohol consumption over there, working under Dr. Desbrow again. The current research he is doing is primarily looks at caffeine, CBD, cognitive physical performance, alcohol consumption, and how all these apply to either performance, recovery, or driving. One big key note is that Dr. Chris Irwin really likes to take the more applicable and applied approach. I think we've all looked at papers that have looked at significant quantitative values and have seen that how this one study can improve performance, but if it isn't tangible to the general population or athletics, it's not going to be grasped well to that community. So he really wants to have all his research have a community and grasp to that.
So then looking at some of the future research that he's interested in, overall, Dr. Chris Irwin is just interested in the challenge of research and looking at real world problems and what different research that can be done in order to help out society and things that are applicable today. And he is also super interested in CBD research, whether or not it be from the government standpoint or the effects of THC on drivers. And also just pain relief, and then also the negative effects of CBD, since that's something that we haven't seen too much yet in the literature. And then he's also super interested in recovery, whether or not it comes to exercise and athlete recovery, but especially looking at post-exercise and exploring athletes' nutrition in a realm of being able to personalize their nutrition and their hydration levels. And so then we'll jump on over to his publications and hand it on over to Peter.
All right, so Dr. Irwin has had 85 publications, so his H index is 18, and then he's got 1,558 citations, and then he's got 4 grants, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in the next slide. And then on the left, he's got 2 papers. Those are his most popular ones, the ones that were cited the most. So the first one being students' perceptions on using Facebook as an interactive learning resource at a university. And that was actually cited 480 times. And the second one being the flaxseed consumption may reduce blood pressure, a systematic review and meta-analysis of controlled trials. And that one was cited 111 times. And then so onto his grants. So I got this off the website, the university website. So the first one was the influence of a brief dedicated nutrition recovery period following endurance exercise tasks on total dietary intake and indicators of change in hydration status. And that was awarded to him from Sports Dietitians Australia research grant for a total of 6,500. And that was between 2015 and 2016. Next being determining the influence of relative energy deficiency in sports on gastrointestinal health and athlete illness. And that one was from the Queensland Academy of Sports Research, and that was a total of 26,500. And that was from 2016 to 2019. And then the third one being a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled crossover pilot trial exploring the effect of CBD on exercise physiology and bioenergetics. And that was from the University of Sydney. And that was from 2020 to 2021, and it was for 14,850. And the last one being the most recent, a fully integrated head and eye tracking hardware system to connect with the existing Griffith University driving and flight simulators. So that's pretty cool. And that was from Griffith University, and it was a total of $114,200, and that's current. So this year in 2021. So on. So thank you guys. And from there, I'm not sure if Dr. Irwin's here, but we'll hand it off to him if he is here.
Yes, he
Thank
is.
you.
He dropped in towards the end there. So Chris, hello, welcome. Long time no see. How you doing?
Very nice to catch up again, Matt, and hello everybody else. Sorry, I must have been a little bit late, was I? In terms of timing, I wasn't. I had to rush down from the lab, so yeah.
We started a little early. I figured you didn't want to listen to all the platitudes that were going to be spoken about you.
I don't mind it when it's positive platitudes. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were you doing in the lab? You guys are studying right now?
Yeah, we've got a one of my honours students is looking at a study that's it's actually a follow up of some of your work, Matt. Looking at caffeine and exercise enjoyment.
Okay.
So we've done a little bit of a similar approach, but also some manipulation from the stuff that you had previously done. To look at exercise intensity changes. If someone gets an opportunity to ride on a cycle for a fixed period of time at a set wattage, and then you give them a period at the end of that to self-select exercise intensity, does caffeine have any influence over how much they self-select on the exercise intensity, and then looking at whether they enjoy exercise as well or not. So this is an honours project. We try and run multiple honours projects across the trimester, as you're familiar with. But yeah, we look for projects that can be done reasonably easily across a short period of time, and this seemed to be one that fit in nicely.
Very nice. So just a little background for my students here. So much like the UK system, the Australian system is typically a 3 to 4 year bachelor's degree. For the most part, for most students, it's about 3 years. But if you decide to do an honors year, that is basically a full-time year of research on top of your bachelor's. And for a lot of students, it kind of fills the gap of doing a master's thesis if they choose to stay in that particular field. Alternatively, we do have master's students who come in I don't know what the percentage breakdown would be, but for a lot of them, it's to get a professional kind of education and credential, so to further their education. And then a smaller percentage will do a master's research, where the goal is to do a master's thesis. And then you have the PhD students who have a much more immersive research experience. So part of the process for my colleagues in Australia is that they're supervising a lot of researchers at different levels, from honors students to PhD students. If it's done correctly, the PhD students kind of mentor everybody, and then the mentors mentor the PhD students, and it's kind of a trickle-down approach, although everybody has their own kind of way of doing it. But that's one of many reasons why Australia and the UK are far more productive in terms of research output than we are.
It is a nice transition as well. It's the way we really capture a lot of our PhD students is through that honours pathway. And so students get an experience doing honours, and then realise that either research is for them or it's not. And they haven't really lost a lot under that short period of time doing honours research if it isn't something that they want to pursue. But if they do want to pursue it, then it's a really nice transition pathway into a PhD. And as you said, Matt, if you've got a good PhD cohort, then they can be really good mentors to the honours students. And we've only really sort of been able to ramp up our total number of PhD students in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so we covered a little bit about your background, but I think a good place to start is, coming from that education background, what really made you decide to go back to school after being a teacher and get immersed in that research culture? What were you, what was the driving force to get back in and see if you could make change from the inside, I guess, as opposed to the outside?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I didn't see the start in terms of what you presented on my background, but I'm sure you went through it quite comprehensively. I've had a lot of changes in my life in terms of my career path, and that was probably the biggest one, was shifting from being a full-time high school teacher, a PE teacher, and then coming back to really get involved in doing something more in nutrition. And that really stemmed from the fact that when I was teaching PE, I really started to feel that there was a place that nutrition had a role in terms of the link between what we eat and how that then has an influence on exercise performance. I really didn't know enough about it at that point, and that really drove me to come back and do my master's in dietetics. And it was really that point when I had that first exposure to research, doing my master's research project looking at caffeine withdrawal, and I just fell in love with research at that point. And it was, for me, that was the defining moment of, this is what I want to do for my career. I want to answer questions. I want to come up with new knowledge, and I just had a good time doing it as well. And so that was the other thing that really motivated me to continue down that path of research, is the fact that I loved being in the lab, collecting data, talking to athletes, working with other researchers like yourself, Matt. We used to come up with ideas about research projects that we wanted to do on, when we go for a run in the afternoon. And so that for me was the defining moment, doing that first research study, and I just said, this is for me.
Yeah, and we kind of introduced them to the title of it, but we didn't actually really talk about it. But your master's thesis was rather intensive as far as master's theses go, especially compared to like what my thesis was or what most of these theses were. And so if I remember correctly, it involved, you had a 3-day run-in, and then you had a testing day. So it was a 4-day condition for each arm, and then you had 4 arms, right?
Correct.
For the study. You were going to participants' houses and collecting blood, as well as doing work in the lab. But yeah, really, and so I guess I'll let you explain the background of the study.
Yeah, I think, as I said, it was my first research experience. And so I was really green when I first came into this and had to learn a lot. And that included how do you take blood. I had to go through and do a phlebotomy course so I could take bloods off participants. And then just learn about the research process as well as trying to run a study at the time. And the idea for the study was really trying to understand how much of a tolerance effect people had when they consumed caffeine, and whether that had an influence on an acute dose of caffeine prior to exercise. And so what we wanted to do was essentially wean people off caffeine for several days prior to giving them an acute caffeine dose, and seeing whether that had any impact on their exercise performance. And so you're right, there were four arms. So there was a placebo arm where they had 4 days of placebo tablets leading into a trial day where they had a placebo prior to exercise, or it was caffeine for 4 days with a placebo prior to exercise, or we had the caffeine arm where it was caffeine for, placebo for 4 days, caffeine prior to exercise, or caffeine for 4 days and then caffeine prior to exercise. So really, trying to wash out this effect of 4 days of caffeine consumption prior to an acute dose. So it was a really interesting study because you're right, I had to go often to participants' houses, deliver food to them. We would pre-package meals that they had to consume prior to the exercise session the day before. And I would have to collect blood off them, often doing it on their kitchen table, which was an eye-opening for me. Doing it at people's houses. But just the experience itself was amazing. Like I learned so much from that experience, and that really then fostered this, I guess, idea of wanting to do more. So it was I think a great experience, but it was tough in terms of the amount of work that was required to be done, because we only had a very short window to try and collect data in our masters. We had basically a 4-month period of data collection. And so I'd often be spending early mornings in the lab, 3 a.m. in the morning sometimes getting there, because cyclists are a bit crazy and they like to arrive early. So that was always tough.
Yeah, and from there you kind of took a left turn for your PhD. You went from caffeine to hydration and alcohol and driving performance. And I know kind of why you ended up going towards the hydration and the alcohol, but maybe just fill the students in on how that evolved.
Yeah. So you're right, it was a very much a deviation from the caffeine side of things, moving into alcohol. I like to say to people when they ask me the type of research I do, and I say, well, I just shift through the different types of drugs that we can consume. We go from, something legal like caffeine to something else that's legal but a bit more intoxicating like alcohol. And then I'm starting to do a lot more research in cannabis these days. So shifting through the different types of ingestion products that we can have and looking at what influence it can have on our performance. But the turn was probably for a couple of reasons. One, I think once you spend an immense amount of time in a very short period doing research like I did with my master's looking at caffeine, I was just sick of it at that point and I wanted to change. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do something different. But there was also an opportunity to explore something that hadn't really been looked at before, and that was this interaction between hydration status and alcohol consumption. And the thought behind that was that if someone does sport or exercise and they lose a bunch of fluid, they're going to have obviously lower total body water content, and then when you drink some alcohol, does the fact that you're dehydrated have some sort of effect on that alcohol? Does it cause greater impairment because you're dehydrated or not? And so we were looking at it from from a couple of different angles, looking at sort of cognitive function, cognitive performance, but also trying to think about sort of real world applicability. So if someone's playing sport in the afternoon, they have a drink after they've played sport and haven't had enough fluid, and then they jump in their car and go and drive home, they might think, oh, I've only had 1 or 2 beers, I might be under the legal limit in terms of alcohol intoxication, but are you actually more impaired because you've been dehydrated? So that was the sort of premise for really exploring this. And we saw a raft of different results depending on what you look at in terms of performance tasks. But that's where I learned how to do driving simulation work, and have spent a bunch of time sort of developing expertise in that, which has led to a whole range of other opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have presented for my career.
Yeah, you taught yourself how to code, you taught yourself how to program, because you had to program the driving task and all these. Yeah, I mean, the simulator was your baby there for a while. Well, probably still is, I imagine, but
I spent a lot of time in the driving simulator room on my own, and so sometimes research can be very lonely because you spend a lot of time on your own doing things late at night. Coding was something that I just knew nothing about before I started my PhD, and it was another eye opener for me where I had to learn. It's basically Python script. I had to learn how to do that. And then since that's really helped me develop a lot more sort of proficiency using R now. So I use R to do all my statistical analysis because the writing side of things is reasonably similar. So there's lots of transferable skills that can come across. And so for me, I think it was one of the best experiences I had, even though at the time I felt like this is hard and I don't know what I'm doing and I think I'm making lots of mistakes. The learning experience from that was probably the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah, I know we have, not me because I am way not smart enough to do it, but we've been trying to teach our students R and coding in their master's stats class, which hasn't exactly gone great the last couple of years or the last year really because of being online. But it's a process that I really encourage you guys to hang in there because it's a skill that will prove useful depending on what avenues you take in the future.
Yeah. For me, like going from not knowing coding a year ago to coding my entire thesis myself is pretty remarkable for me.
I've seen someone in the chat say, it feels great when your code works properly. It gives you an absolute rush when it works properly, especially if you're doing some really complex coding. We've done a number of multi-level meta-regressions recently, and when you do that sort of stuff in R and your code actually works and it runs properly, there's no better feeling. The other downside to that is when it doesn't work. Yeah, as the person who said here, it makes you want to cry.
Yeah. And so you primarily, so you looked at fluid balance with the alcohol consumption and dehydration, but you also were looking at cognitive task. So, I guess perhaps just talk a little bit about maybe some of the cognitive measures you used, and then what sort of effects we would expect to see due to just dehydration, and then some of the combined results that you saw.
Yeah, so obviously this is one of the challenges when you're doing research in cognition or you have cognitive performance tasks, is that there are quite a variety of different tasks, and it really depends on the cognitive domains that you're trying to test, and you're trying to understand, what influence whatever the intervention is has on that cognitive domain. And so we were really interested through my PhD in looking at cognitive tasks that related to driving skills, things that would be important if we were driving a motor vehicle. And whilst we had the driving simulator to look at it in an applied sense, it's also important to understand, I guess, the individual isolated domains of cognition that might sort of lead to, why you see results in an applied setting. So a lot of the tasks we use, and this goes from through my PhD, but also through other research we've done more recently as well, is looking mostly at things like reaction time tasks, so choice reaction time. It's often something that we have to do when we're driving a motor vehicle. We have to react very quickly, and if you lose that ability to react, well, that can be catastrophic in terms of motor vehicle accident. Choice reaction time is one of the predominant tasks. We also tried to understand things like inhibition. So we know that alcohol has an influence on someone's ability to inhibit their response. You become less, as you get more intoxicated, you become less likely to be able to, do things properly and inhibit sort of bad responses that you don't want to happen. So that was another element we were interested in as well. Often you might be driving and you have to make a split decision where you might have to, instead of going about the normal response, is actually stop doing that normal response or change that response in some way. And so task inhibition was another element that we looked at from a cognitive domain standpoint. And then we've also looked at things like psychomotor vigilance. So it's really looking at attention. When you do long drives in a motor vehicle, one of the things that tends to happen is that we become inattentive over a period of time, and things just happen autonomously. You've probably all experienced it yourself at some stage when you've driven a car. You drive home and you realise you get home, you don't know how you got there because it just becomes automatic. And so attention-based tasks are other things that we often sort of try to explore. But some of the more recent work that we've done is trying to also look at the influence of exercise on cognition, because we know that even though you might lose fluid, and there are some really nice studies that have been done to demonstrate that cognitive performance across most of those domains is diminished with fluid loss. There may actually be a counter effect by exercise itself, and it really does depend on the type of exercise that's performed, the mode and the duration and the intensity of exercise. But we've done a recent study that looked at high quality athletes and gave them a really hard exercise task to perform. They lost a bunch of fluid during it, and irrespective of their fluid loss, so they were dehydrated to about 2% body weight. But irrespective of that, they actually performed better on the cognitive performance tasks immediately after exercise because of the arousal that occurs from exercise itself, even at high intensity. And it wasn't really until a little bit later that positive effect of exercise started to diminish, even though they were dehydrated. So this idea that losing fluid is automatically going to influence performance in a negative way, well, it really depends on the context. And so this is why it's so important to consider all of the contextual elements of research and not just take for granted that this effect always occurs, which is, one of the pieces of advice I often try to give to students as they're starting research is that, you really need to be considerate of all of the contextual factors and think about all of the elements that can apply here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, we've talked about it a fair amount in this class, and then about half these students I had for research methods in the fall. And so just talking about, being able to understand the context of a study and, understanding that science is based on consensus. So no single study should be held up as some golden ticket, and learning to take things as part of the larger picture.
That's why we often, sort of start to deviate or look towards, consolidated evidence. So, your systematic reviews and meta-analyses become really important pieces of, the larger puzzle because they've really consolidated the evidence down and then also done quality assessment on those studies to demonstrate what the overall effect is and what the quality of the current evidence is around that.
So I seem to remember us talking about this, and so I'm going to try to loop back to this. But you were doing some consulting before the Commonwealth Games, right? You were working with some of the teams and the sports that were involved. And so maybe you could talk about the difference between, being in an academic setting and then working with actual athletes who are, competing against maybe not necessarily the world's best, but a lot of other very elite athletes. So the Commonwealth Games, for those of you that don't know, it's for any country that is or was a part of the British Empire at some point and still has ties to the United Kingdom. So, it's not like the US, Russia, it's not like the Olympics where every country can conceivably be there. It's smaller, but it is still highly competitive, and you still get a lot of Olympic caliber athletes. And I think 2018, it was held in Gold Coast.
Yep.
Couldn't remember exactly, but Chris and a few of my other colleagues had opportunities to be involved with some of the sports as nutrition consultants, and so I'll let him talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that's really nice about research, and why I love it so much is that it can be quite diverse. Sometimes you're working in a lab collecting data, creating knowledge that way. Other times you do get opportunities to be involved in things like that consultancy opportunity, and that was working with athletes that had come from sort of more disadvantaged areas throughout the world. That was still part of going to be part of the Commonwealth Games. And they were coming to Australia to spend a bit of time here on what they called a camp, where they'd get exposure to academics like myself who would give advice around nutrition and its place in sport and exercise. They'd also have opportunities to work with physiotherapists, psychologists, and a whole raft of other allied health professionals. And these were opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't get in their home country because they just didn't have the funding or the coaching or support. And so it was really nice to be able to sort of give back in that way to groups of athletes who were good athletes. And as Matt mentioned, they may not be world-class athletes, but they're up there. They're elite in their sport. And I got an opportunity to talk to them about how nutrition plays a role and why it's important for them to really, as top athletes, to keep nutrition in the back of their mind and prepare well prior to performance. And I focused a lot around hydration because a lot of the athletes were coming from countries that were in very hot parts of the world. So in Papua New Guinea and Fiji, and they would be coming to Australia, and the climate, the change in climate might have been a little bit different. But when they're training at home, often many of them have no idea how hydration has an influence on their performance. And for me, it was an opportunity to, I guess, try and teach them something, so give them some knowledge, but also do some testing with the athletes. And so I did a whole range of field testing, looking at hydration markers to really get an insight as to what their approach and behaviour was around hydration prior to training and exercise. And it was nice to be able to feed that information back to the athletes. And essentially, they were pretty poor at hydrating, and their behaviours were not great at all. In fact, and very few of them consumed enough fluid to remain hydrated, and very, very few of them actually commenced exercise in a reasonably well hydrated state. Most of them were dehydrated prior. And so I'd fed that information back to them, gave them some workshops around how to monitor urine colour, how to look at sort of urine specific gravity as markers of hydration, and then some sort of behavioural aspects around what they should be doing from a food and fluid point of view to try and prepare for training and exercise and competition. And then they went back to their home countries and then came back again for a second camp. And I got an opportunity to evaluate whether that had any impact on their behaviours. And I was just amazed because their behaviours changed. And they were much better at preparing for exercise and performance. in terms of certainly in terms of fluid intake and making sure that they were hydrated. And it was a world of difference. In fact, a number of them came back to me after the Commonwealth Games and were so thankful for that experience because they learnt a lot. And there were quite a number of athletes in that group that ended up medaling in the Commonwealth Games. And I remember working with a group that was they were doing lawn bowls. I don't know if you've ever played lawn bowls before. It's not exactly a high intensity sport, but at the elite level, it's still, they rely a lot on their cognitive function. And if you're dehydrated, that's going to influence your cognitive function. And these guys were coming in dehydrated at the start of the camp, and by the end of it, they were well hydrated. They ended up getting a bronze medal. That's the first bronze medal that they ever got. At that type of level. And so that's the type of impact you can have. And for me, it was just about providing information and taking the time to show them, what to do and how to monitor hydration. And, that made a world of difference to them. And they were so grateful for that. So it's really nice to see real world change and get that sort of experience and feedback from athletes. So encourage anyone that has that opportunity to engage in that type of work in the field with people, and they'll be forever grateful for it.
Have you written that up? I thought I remembered, maybe not a paper, but I seem to remember a presentation or a poster or something.
I did a presentation at the ACSM conference a number of years ago. I've been very slack on that and haven't written that up. But sometimes you get caught up with research, and you'll be very familiar with this, Matt, that research results tend to go into the top drawer, and then it's not until years later that you actually pull that back out and say, I've got to actually do something with that. I'm not a big fan of doing that, but occasionally it happens. You just get caught up doing so many things. My role is as a balanced academic, I only have 40% of my time dedicated to research, and the rest is dedicated to things like teaching and other business, admin business. But
yes, the fun stuff. That's been sucking the life out of me for the last year and a half.
I'm feeling the pain. Yeah.
It's not getting any better.
It seems to have crept in a lot more, especially with the online delivery of things as well. It does take up a lot of our time.
Yeah, so that's it's definitely not something that you are prepared for as part of your PhD. You're trained to be a scientist, and then here I am 7 years out, and probably 70% of my job is administration.
Yeah. And the other thing that you don't really get prepared for, and that's been a really big learning experience for me post PhD, is writing grant applications. It's a really big part of our role as an academic, sourcing funding to do research. These things don't come cheap, but you can't do research without money, and so trying to source that often requires going through a very competitive process of seeking funding, and that's been a big learning experience for me, is trying to source money. I've been very fortunate of recent times of being involved in a number of quite high paying grants, which has been great, and stuff that is often for equipment more so than anything else, but there's still that equipment, having that access to that equipment becomes so important when you're doing research. So getting equipment grants is great. And you saw on the list there, one of the most recent one was getting some equipment for our driving simulator to be able to track eye movements. So what we're interested in is not just looking at what happens from a vehicle standpoint, but what the driver is doing, what's happening from where are they looking, when they're driving in a simulation, what are they looking at, where are they looking, and how quickly does that sort of movement of the eyes change when they're under different conditions like alcohol intoxication or cannabis use.
Yeah, and so let's see. Because I know cannabis is still federally illegal in Australia, and it's regulated at the federal level, right? It's not a state thing like it is over here.
Correct.
But how difficult is it to do cannabis research over there? So, like, how difficult would it be for you to recruit participants and then give them, like, do you have to buy the cannabis through the government? Because technically, we are supposed to do that if we do cannabis research. Is it having,
Yeah.
well, I guess, how's the legality of figuring all that stuff out, Ben, for you?
It's extremely difficult, extremely difficult here, and you're right. We're still, I would say that our regulations, our laws are so far behind on this, and this is why we're doing the research, is really to try and inform policy change that needs to happen. I guess to go back a bit, part of the reason we do this research is to try and, I guess, answer questions around people's concerns about, people having THC or using cannabis, having THC in their system. The reality is that you can have THC in your system for 4 weeks after using cannabis, and that doesn't mean you're impaired. But if you get pulled over at the roadside in Australia and you've got THC in your system, you're done, you're booked. And that to me is a real problem that we need to fix. And that requires then our policymakers getting on board to make change. And to make that change, we've got to inform the policymakers with evidence. And so that evidence is starting to really come to the forefront now. We published a paper recently that really explores that window of impairment. That's a meta-analysis, meta-regression. That looked at the window of impairment, and the likelihood is that after about 7 hours you're not going to see that much impairment, especially in regular users. And this has been picked up a lot in the last couple of days by media here, but also a number of politicians. And so I've been very fortunate to work on that type of research with some people down at the Lambert Initiative for Cannabinoid Therapeutics down at the University of Sydney. So having, I guess, networks or collaborators that really know that space is so important, because I'm not a cannabis researcher, but I still like the, I guess, idea of doing the research in that area, but I don't know everything about regulations. I don't know how to source cannabis, but I've got collaborators that do. And so working with them that know that regulation, know how to source it, and they're often getting it internationally. So they're getting it from companies in Canada.
I'm still trying to get all that figured out, but I know. So you can't, for those of you who, well, none of you guys probably know this, but you can't use U.S. government money to do cannabis research. Additionally, in the event that you are doing cannabis research where you're giving cannabis to participants, I can't just walk into a dispensary and buy some. I have to get it from a government source. So the government has a marijuana farm at the University of Mississippi, where they grow weed for research purposes. In terms of CBD, that is even more of a murky gray area, because there was the hemp bill, which was passed in 2018, I believe, that basically made CBD legal as long as the THC concentrations are less than 0.3%. But as Chris will attest based on his research, and as the research has kind of started to show, even if the label says THC free, there's still a chance you're going to get pinged with detectable levels of THC in that substance. So just like sports supplements can be contaminated with all kinds of stuff, so can CBD. And so finding a company that would be willing to not only give me product to do CBD research, but would also be willing to have their product third-party tested for purity, it just adds to the challenges of having to do research in this area. And it's unfortunate that there's so many roadblocks, because as Chris kind of mentioned, while the laws in Australia may be a little behind, the prevalence of usage of both CBD and cannabis in the first world is, I don't know if I would say it's exploded, but it has definitely gone up. And
Yeah. The other thing with that is we've seen far more in the way of medicinal cannabis use as well, for obviously for conditions that people have, and so what the government, the current policies or regulations, don't allow people to use it medicinally and then be able to drive, and so what we've got is a situation where we're putting people that require this for a condition, and then we're hamstringing them in any other ability to be able to go about their daily lives. And so that's a real challenge. And we've had, I think the latest is about 65,000 people that have now been prescribed medicinal cannabis for whatever condition they're trying to treat. And so it's not a small number, it's ever increasing. And the challenge is trying to get policy to keep up with that and get the government to make those changes that are required. So it's really important research.
I mean, based on what happened over here, I think as the prescription or the medical approval kind of gains traction and you guys continue to do research, is you'll eventually start to see it legalized on a broader scale medically, and then it'll move recreationally at some point. But you and I will probably be retired by then.
Probably.
Emeriti. Let's see. So coming back to alcohol, you guys had been piloting some hangover stuff. Did you ever actually go through with any of those studies?
Yeah, we did. We've actually just recently published a paper that looked at hangover experiences. So just to sort of take it back a bit, the reason why we got into some of the hangover research was really a lot of the research up until now has been done based on surveys of college students, asking them, a survey about whether their last drinking experience and whether they experienced a hangover, and how many drinks they had prior to experiencing that hangover, and then how bad that hangover was. Now, anyone that does that type of research knows that that's pretty loose data. When you're just asking a questionnaire. And so we were really concerned about the reliability and accuracy of that information. And we wanted to do something that was a bit more rigorous and robust. And we did a laboratory study where we looked at hangover experiences after consuming alcohol, but under the standardized conditions on 2 trials. And so basically we got people to come into the lab, drink a bunch of alcohol, and we fed them quite a lot. It was about 10 standard drinks in a very short window of time. And then they slept over in the lab. We asked them a whole bunch of questions, also put them in the driving simulator the next day when they woke up. And we measured things like hydration status and looked at a whole raft of factors like sleep and what the quality of their sleep was, because there's lots of factors that can contribute to someone's experience of a hangover. And the fact that we did it in a repeated measures design, where we looked at it and standardized it to see whether we saw the same effect each time, was, I think, the important element of that study. Do people always get a hangover after they drink the same amount of alcohol under the same conditions? Well, the answer is no, they don't. Or at least they don't get the same severity of hangover experience. So it can change quite a lot. So one day you might have a really bad hangover after drinking. The next time, under the same conditions, you might have a hangover, but it may be less severe. And so this really opened up our eyes a little bit around the quality of the research in this area and the opportunity to explore reliability of these experiences, and the fact that we were really reliant up until now on survey data to report this. I just found quite amazing that people hadn't done a lot more laboratory-based work. So that paper's just been published. It's by one of our honours students, Nathan Delange. So you'll see Ben, myself on that paper as well. But we're always interested in exploring a bit more. We've actually got a new PhD student who's about to embark on some alcohol work, but looking at alcohol and energy intake. But we'll also be exploring things like hangover experiences and intoxication and impairment, that sort of stuff as well.
that energy intake, is that energy intake study going to be like the one that we had thought up so many years ago about going down to the Gold Coast and just grabbing people as they come out of bars and giving them money to go buy food?
Yeah, there may be an element of that. It'll depend on ethics. So I'm sure, Matt, you've talked to all of the students about the challenges with ethics.
Some. We are fairly fortunate with our IRB, but then again, we're not giving people alcohol or anything like that. But I have kind of gone through some of the beer rehydration studies and kind of what that entailed in terms of how we had to keep people in the lab until their BAC came back below the legal limit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always part of the challenge. But yeah, maybe certainly looking at energy intake, it's really this interaction. We know that alcohol can influence our decision making, and when it comes to food, it's not no surprise. I'm sure everyone's experienced it at some stage where you've had a few too many, and then things like kebabs look really nice at that point in time. Chips, kebabs, hot fried foods, and really, we're interested in sort of the behavioural side of things. What happens if we change the alcohol dose? What happens if we give people beer, but they don't know that it's alcohol free because it tastes the same? Does that have an influence over their energy intake? So really exploring some of this stuff in a bit more detail.
Should be interesting.
I just love doing beer research. So it means I get to taste the beers beforehand to make sure they're all okay for people to drink.
Are you guys still working with that group in Germany, or have you moved? I know Ben had kind of a setup with 4X there for a while.
Yeah, he's actually we just had a few beers delivered. We're running some osmolality on some beer samples that have just been provided to us from a place down in Victoria. We'll basically work with anyone that wants to give us anything, so including money or product. Yep.
So I've been leading the discussion. We've covered a fair bit of topics. Do my students have any questions? Anything you would like to ask Dr. Irwin about?
Oh, there's Ben. I've got Ben.
Is that the big guy?
He'll come in and say hello.
Only because I want to troubleshoot an issue. What's the troubleshoot for the cow when the data doesn't show up again? When the second person comes on and the data doesn't, it's showing the flow loops, but the data's not coming in every couple of seconds.
I would normally restart the breeze. Yeah, but don't shut the pump. Don't shut the valve off.
No, I haven't shut the valves off. I've restarted it. I've changed the Pneumatak.
Yeah.
But it's still shit itself. But I'll reset it. Oh, sorry.
See you. Come and say hello. Yeah. So this is Dr. Ben Desborough, or associate professor or professor. I can't remember what he is. Something. Yeah.
Local problem solver. But mate, what was over your hair? You had these beautiful orange ginger locks, mate. All gone.
Trying to stay aero on the bike.
No, I'll just go up because we've got this trial, this caffeine thing running. So I'll just try that again.
Try it again. If it doesn't work, I'll then come up.
Well, if it doesn't work, he's probably past his caffeine timing anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. No.
See, this is what happens in research. You get real world troubleshooting that has to occur when something doesn't work properly. Equipment failure.
Well, they're familiar with equipment failure. Well, most of them are familiar with equipment failure.
Doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to answer any questions. If anyone has any questions about anything, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to know anything else, I see Alison wrote in the chat there pizza. That's a good. I don't know whether that's I should get pizza.
That was a drunk food comment.
Gotcha. Post drinking, yeah. Bamboozled.
Yeah, that's fairly typical for them. They just kind of absorb it all in.
Yeah.
Reflect.
It's a good experience. You're going through. Everyone's going through a research experience, right? They have to collect their own data. It's a great experience to go through. Learn as much as you can.
Yeah, a lot of them have had to move to online or survey-based work just because of the COVID restrictions we had.
Yeah. That's been a real big interruption to a lot of research, and it's no surprise over the last sort of 12 to 18 months we've seen more review papers published than anything else, because really that's people have had to do desktop research. They've been unable to get into the lab and collect data off participants, but that'll change again. Is that the case for you guys there? Are you able to get into the lab and collect any data now?
Yeah, so we started opening up last fall. I mean, there were a lot of safety precautions and you had to basically account for everybody that came in and out of the lab. And we're moving to a point now where summer and this coming fall will probably open everything back up to being in there and not needing as much PPE, especially now that we'll see what happens, but the majority of faculty have been vaccinated or are going to be vaccinated, and most of I know more than a few of the students have already gotten at least their first dose, and so we're heading in the right direction. But the administration, I'm not exactly sure who's giving them guidance, because there doesn't really seem to be a policy-driven. There doesn't really seem to be any rationale behind the decisions that they're making about summer and fall. But
yeah, we've been very fortunate here in that, and you've probably seen it all over the news, that we've got very low number of cases of coronavirus here, so that's been, I think, quite useful. We had a couple of small lockdowns, but it really hasn't hampered research too much. We had a period last year where we were shut out of campus for a number of months and had to go purely online, but and I was halfway through a research study at that point, looking at we were exploring the influence of different caffeine sources on cognitive performance. So what happens if you have the same amount of caffeine in coffee versus having it in an energy drink or as a capsule, and what people's perceptions of that were like. And so I was halfway through that data collection and we got shut out, but managed to collect the rest of the data by the end of the year last year. So that study, we're just waiting on running the blood samples for caffeine analysis, and then be able to write that paper up and publish it. But yeah, since then it's been full into the data collection in the lab, which has been great. Bar a couple of obviously administration sort of things that you need to do, which is collect everyone's address and phone details when they come into the lab to make sure that they're contactable if something does break out, but just more admin.
Yeah. All right. I guess we're about kind of wrapping it up out of time, but just any final words of wisdom or consideration for most of them probably are not going on to research careers, but just general advice that you might have?
Look, I think even if you don't go on to do to have a research career, don't underestimate the value of research and science and reading papers. That was one thing that I learned off you, Matt. To be honest, you were very good at reading the papers, like staying up to date with research, and I think that it's a testament to what you've gone on to go and do in terms of your research career. If you fall behind, it's really hard to catch it back up again. So it's really important to stay up to date and current with the literature, because things change. It's a dynamic thing, and things change so rapidly. And so if you're interested in a certain area of research, stay up to date with that research as it is currently. And try not to fall behind. And you can't stay across everything, across every sort of area, but if you've got a passion for something, really get engaged and engrossed in that research area. Know what's current, and look for gaps in the literature as well as to what don't we know. It's not always about what we do know; it's about what we don't know. And that's one of the things with reading sort of consolidated research articles like systematic reviews and meta-analyses, is that they don't just tell us what we know, they actually offer opportunity there as well of what we don't know, and look for those as, okay, that's a potential pathway to do more research and learn some more. But I would say, yeah, even if you're not doing research as a career path, it's still valuable. I work a lot with dietitians here, so we train graduate dietitians, and a lot of them don't go on to do honours and research, but nonetheless, they're working in an evidence-based profession, and that word's important, evidence-based. And you can't be evidence-based if you don't know what the current evidence is. So stay up to date with research, continue to read, and it's amazing how much that can have an influence over your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head, and we had a great example of that. About a month ago, we had George Brooks come and talk to us. And, here you go back to the 1950s, 1960s, lactate's this boogeyman that causes muscle fatigue. And, now we know that it's involved in so many different things, and it's so important from a physiological standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did see that lecture he gave at the ACSM a number of years ago, and that was an eye opener for me as well. Just seeing him present on that work, and I think, we've learned a lot about how things have, or our perceptions have changed around lactate, and how important it can be as an energy source. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right. I know you're not huge on social media, but if any of the students wanted to get in touch with you or, reach out, email be the best way for that?
Yeah, email's absolutely fine. I'm pretty responsive with email. You can follow me on Twitter, but I'm not a huge poster on Twitter. But I do often, when I have a new paper that comes out, I'll tweet that. Or if there's a paper that I've read that I think is really interesting, I'll tweet that. So you can follow me on Twitter. I don't even know what my own Twitter handle is, so you'd have to look that up. And then but email is absolutely fine. If you have any questions or you want to know any more, I'm always happy to respond by email.
And if you guys want to reach out to him, you can email me and I'll pass his info on to you.
Perfect.
All right, thanks, Chris. I need to set up a call with you and Ben and just chat. I actually had Sue in the class earlier this semester too, so need to catch up with everybody.
Yeah, well, that would be great. I think it'd be really nice to catch up because there's probably a couple of studies we want to get up and running in the next little while that I think you'll have some really good insight into and come on as a collaborator. So, we still like to collaborate with people even though they're halfway across the world. So, yep.
I got maybe 2-3 years. I might be putting in for sabbatical, so I'll be sure to make a trip back.
Come back to the Gold Coast. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We'll take you on.
Thank you. We appreciate your time. We'll let you go. We'll let you go save Ben in the lab.
Hopefully he hasn't caused too much destruction up there. I'll go and fix whatever he's done wrong. Great to talk to you guys, and good to see you, Matt. I'll hopefully talk to you again soon. Eh? All right.
Yeah, you too, mate. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, gang. Hopefully that was enjoyable. I see people have already kind of started to drop off, but just so that I am clear, Megan, Chase, David,